Thank you for your patience. I'm coming to my concluding remarks. I have briefly sketched the main challenges the EU is confronted with nowadays. I've listed some of the new tools of the EU and also a number of issues which can be considered as unfinished business. I know the picture is mixed, but I would like to draw your attention on the fact that overall progress has been impressive. I always am astonished by the skepticism that I encounter until I explain that 2 years ago nobody would have predicted that Angela Merkel would have been able to decide a number of things she has decided now. I'm always surprised that people are skeptical until we explain that the way in which the unfortunate conflict in the Balkan is completely different than the attitude of Europe towards Libya. And I think that even if one needs to be critical at each and every stage of a process, one needs to see the progress as well. The easiest work, in a sense, has been done because the next steps will, without doubt, infringe more than before on national prerogatives, on traditional sovereign functions, on old habits of nation states. As political leaders, we have to make a sound judgment. Where are our priorities? How can we do the best for the security and the well-being of our citizens? Although I clearly said that nation states continue to have important duties to fulfill, the response to the biggest challenges that we all face as individual member states is not on the national level anymore. The conclusion is crystal clear for the Belgian political situation. I dare to go further. We feel, and I may speak as one of the representatives of that group of political leaders, we feel supported in this course of action by a large majority of our population. The situation may be considered differently in the countries to which some of you belong, but you, young citizens, you too will have to reflect on how to face the core challenges of these times, how to tackle them in the most efficient way. A collective effort, such as we have endeavored at EU level, takes time, requires sacrifices, revisiting long-cherished traditions and taking better into account the interests and different sensibilities of fellow European citizens within the enlarged Union. We shall all have to consider giving up some of our own individual sovereignty with the firm hope of receiving in return a collective sovereignty at a higher level. To provoke our ensuing debate, I will finish with a short reflection on the sense of clinging to the principle of unanimity decisions in the CFSP. I have no knowledge of a functioning democratic structure in the world where all decisions on external policy are always taken in full consensus. In all democracies, even the biggest and the oldest ones, the executive power must count on a majority in Parliament, not necessarily on unanimity. Bipartisan or unanimous support is sometimes desirable, and I was very much looking for it when we engaged as a caretaker government in the Libya military endeavor. But unanimous support is not necessary. A democratic majority is sufficient to support a policy. In the EU, we firmly keep to unanimity decisions in matters of CFSP. That is not the case in other policy areas of the EU, where qualified majority voting has become the norm since the Treaty of Lisbon. The boundary of what is accepted to be decided by qualified majority voting is still moving. At the end of September, the European Parliament adopted the so-called six-pack on the strengthening of our economic governance, and in so doing, the gradual introduction of qualified majority voting in sensitive budgetary matters has been accepted. Admittedly, it was out of necessity in the phase of economic and financial crisis. I ask you a question. Shall we have to live forever with the ineffective unanimity procedures when it comes to CFSP? The answer to that lies partly in your hands. The support for this or that direction will show how you, as future politicians, will judge that situation. If you cling to the national logic and the unanimity rule, you will have to accept, as people being in charge of a European Union, that it will continue to move at the pace of the slowest participant. if you think that Europe has a role to play, we need to think about something which is democratic and which is about finding majorities for your policies. I leave this thought with you and hope that you will reflect on it not only tonight but also in the rest of your careers, which I very sincerely hope to be very successful ones. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Minister, thank you very much for this very insightful, informative, and may I say very bold lecture. And if I look at the entire field you covered, from global governance to strategic partnerships, neighborhood policy, Lisbon, Libya, I dare to say that we as professors of European studies can now send our students home for the remainder of the semester because we covered it all and covered it better than probably we could hope for covering it. So thank you very much. And this was a great lecture. You also kindly agreed to now take a question and answer session. So that's the opportunity for you, of course, to ask the Minister any kind of question that's on your mind or any discussion point. I guess we're going to have time for 2 rounds. We take maybe 5 or 6 questions to start off with.
Good idea.
And then we have a second round. So, floor to you. May I also please ask you to speak quite loudly because we don't have a microphone. And please also identify yourself as a courtesy. Thank you. Let's start with Bill.
Yes, I'm Bill Shue, Professor of History and Associate Dean of Azaleas College. I was very much intrigued, Mr. Minister, by your listing of the strategic partners, in particular the last strategic partner. That struck me very much because you start off with a list of, let's say, the usual suspects, the big powers, and then you end with Africa. And that struck me because the usual suspects are actors, they are identifiable, they have a will, they speak with a clear policy. But Africa has no common policy. It's not a common entity. I think Henry Kissinger would probably say to you, if you want to talk to Africa, who do I call? He can call someone now in Europe because we have Catherine Ashton. How can one develop a European coherent foreign policy with an entity as diverse and as challenging as Africa, which has no real voice? I find that a major challenge.
Thank you. If you have questions, I can take comment. Yes.
I would actually have 2 questions for you. First of all, on the Caucasus, you have just mentioned the Eastern Partnership meeting, I think 2 weeks ago in Warsaw. And here I wonder how effective the Eastern Partnership has so far been, because you have not been really able to decide on a joint position on Belarus together with partners in the Eastern Partnership. So in the end, we might wonder how effective is the Eastern Partnership without the membership perspective for those countries in the Eastern Partnership. You were already mentioning that from Belgian perspective, rapprochement is maybe enough. So I would like to know if this is the position of all the member states in the European Union, or if it's mainly a Belgian position. And then secondly, I missed, you didn't mention Turkey in your tour d'horizon.
I do it all the time, but didn't do it this time.
Yeah, talk about it all the time.
But you give me the occasion.
Actually, I would be very interested, because recently there has been a change in the Turkish policies towards Syria, which might be very important for the European Union, because it seems to be not really, it's not possible to find a resolution in the UN Security Council, but maybe there's a possibility to have a kind of joint action between the European Union and Turkey on Syria, because Turkey, of course, has much influence on the situation in Syria. So I would be interested in your assessment of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, please.
I'm Tui from the Institute for European Studies. I have just one question, but given the limited time frame, so I just would like to go directly into the question. So could the excellencies share with us a bit more about how EU could handle in the relations between EU and so-called strategic partners like the BRICS, for instance, China or India, given the existence of their different interests or even conflicting interests involved. Thank you.
You want two more? The first one? Yeah, check.
I'm Jacob. I'm a student at Vesalius College. And I was wondering, you were talking about how you envisioned a future wherein the EU External Action Service may supersede national foreign ministries and foreign affairs on the international level. And I was wondering, where does this public support for this lie? And especially given the financial crisis that the EU is going through, where the Eurozone and the financial policies of the EU are being called into question, how do you guarantee safety and security for your people when the EU itself is having its own issues in other realms?
Thank you. Final one? What's that?
I'm Alexandra. I just wanted to ask you if you really believe that the EU is likely to get consensual agreements on its external policies, given that it's plagued by divisiveness and disagreements inside. And it's also a question of the EU being representative of all its member states overall, because we could argue that there are certain countries such as France and Germany that are much better represented and that are imposing their opinions on other members, especially the most recent ones. And we can think about the Schengen area controversy here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Quite a broad collection.
Yes.
Eastern Partnership, BRICS, EAS, and consensus.
On Bill, it was, on Africa, you've got me, because it's different. It does not have a single telephone that is true. Now, this being said, you know the joke about Kissinger being very happy about having finally a single phone number, but losing track of the time difference, calling to Europe and getting the answering machine of Europe, where the answering machine says, yes, you're now connected with the single telephone of the European Union. For the position of the French, press 1, for the position of the Germans, press 2. So it's not only about having a single phone, it's also about having a common strategy. And coming back to the fifth question, where I will answer also on our capacity of having a common view, it is clear that it is too plain not to see that the African continent is not, the African Union is absolutely not comparable with the European Union, in no sense. But this being said, I continue to say that for those who are interested in the long term, this very pragmatical definition that I use of strategic partnership, it's about identifying those who by their choices, by their actions, by what is happening over there, can influence the life of your citizens. Africa comes into play. Simply looking at migration policy, looking at their availability of the complete tableau of Mendeleev, when it's about resources grab that is going on in the world, the conflicts that can get exported on tremendous important levels of policy making. We see that Africa, what it does or what it does not do, has an influence on our lives. And that for me is already the definition of seeing a need to engage in a strategic partnership. Now, you are absolutely right. It's difficult to find the partners with whom to discuss. I went to South Africa. I saw there a very prominent country, proud of itself, very much busy also with part of its history and tackling with a lot of problems, but also with an ambition to play a role which goes further than only the boundaries of its own frontiers. In a sense, I was surprised that a country that had at one point needed very much, let's say, international pressure to put an end to a regime, was now pretty much engaged in a logic of non-interference in a lot of discussions when it came to the Mediterranean. So I was very surprised. But I feel that talking to, for example, South Africa, as one of the motors of this continent, was for me, as a Belgian politician, who knows, let's say, more than some others about the countries of the Great Lakes, an eye-opener. Because they got me to understand that joining forces in countries like Burundi, like Rwanda, like Congo, can be a very good strategy in order to continue to exert your influence, but doing it not alone. So I'm not saying Africa is a homogeneous bloc. I simply say we cannot afford ourselves to not be interested in these countries, and be it countries like Nigeria, be it the countries of the Maghreb, be it Egypt, be it South Africa. We need to have a good look at it. I hope I answered a little bit to your question.